Dear friends, today we're going to look at a concept that, if you truly understand it, will completely change the way you look at the board. This concept is overprotection. And just a heads up, this lesson is a bit more advanced than usual. It's not the kind of idea you'll be able to use tomorrow without thinking. Here, you need to pause, observe, and really understand what you're thinking. In fact, let me tell you something. If you can, watch this lesson more than once. And if you have a chessboard at home, even better. Set up the pieces, go through the game with me, because when you do it physically, touching the pieces and seeing it on your own board, everything makes more sense and sticks with you in a different way. And I say this from experience. Now, if you're a bit more of an enthusiast, if you're already starting to get even better at chess, and you're no longer just in the phase of simply moving the pieces and that's it, if you want to start understanding a little more, this lesson's for you. Here, we start to touch on ideas that grandmasters use, ideas that aren't obvious at first glance, alright? You'll see. These are ideas that decide games. Right now, I'm sure many of you are thinking, ugh, chess teacher's getting a bit heavy today. This lesson sounds really dense. Trust me, it's not. I promise you one thing, it's not going to be heavy. I'm going to put all my effort into making this lesson super entertaining. And on top of that, you'll be able to understand these complicated concepts in a really simple way. Let me introduce the game we're going to use to explain this concept. Nimzowitsch versus Rubinstein, played in 1911 in Karlsbad. Right? It's a, well, famous game, in quotes, and we're going to understand it really well. In fact, Nimzowitsch was one of my favorite players. I've read several of his books, and I love him. And we're going to see how Rubinstein in this case plays the French defense against him. E4, E6, D4, and D5. And here, as you know, there are quite a few options, with the most well-known being E5, the advance variation, pawn takes pawn, the exchange variation, or either of these two moves, knight C3 or knight D2, using for example the classical variation with knight C3 or the terrace variation with knight to D2. In this case, Nimzowitsch uses the advance move, E5. Very good! When we understand that we're entering the advance variation, we realize one thing. We're entering a battle of pawn chains. Those of you who joined the most anticipated pack of the year a while ago, to whom I sent the classes privately, in one of those classes we talked about the pawn chain, right? And we understood that pawn chains are attacked at their base. In this case, the base is d4, and the other base, the black base, is e6. That's why black tries to quickly fight back with the pawn on c5, and in the future, who knows, if white wants, they could try to attack the pawn on e6, although that's not a priority. The game, logically, continues around the d4 square, knight to c6 attacking it, and knight to f3 defending it. Here, you can already start to see which is the key point that we need to overprotect. In this case, the key point we need to overprotect is the d4 square, and you'll see why. If this point falls and disappears, the e5 square will fall as well, and the center will belong entirely to black, leading the game to disaster. Whereas if we are able to hold on to this point throughout the whole game, we'll be able to get spectacular value from it and enjoy a space advantage, as you can see, thanks to this pawn structure, especially the pawns on d4 and e5, which will make the game much easier for us. Honestly, this game is going to fascinate you. Queen to b6, they keep putting pressure on this d4 point, and now there's several possible moves here. One of the most popular moves, the one Nimzowitsch used, is bishop to d3. Just so you know, for those of you who aren't quite professionals yet, taking this pawn is a mistake, because after all the exchanges, okay, the bishop would come out to b5 with a check, and then the queen would be completely exposed and would be captured. You can check this for yourselves on your own board. The idea is that here there's only one possible move, and that's pawn takes pawn. Bishop to d7, trying to avoid these kinds of tricks, is also a bad move, since it would allow us to go into the line with d takes c5, and when this bishop develops, we're going to castle, and for example, after a few moves, this bishop could end up trapped. So this bishop would probably have to leave. So we would still play b4, and this knight wouldn't be able to go anywhere, making this an extremely comfortable position for us. That's why here, in this position, after bishop to e3, bishop to d7 is a mistake. The only correct move is to first exchange the pawns on d4, releasing the tension, and now, yes, play bishop to d7, so that now we don't have the idea of capturing on c5 and gaining that tempo. Do you understand this? Good. You can watch it as many times as you need, and I'm aware that this lesson is a bit more advanced, but if you make good use of it, this lesson is worth money, believe me. Now they're attacking this d4 square again with two pawns. The most logical move is to retreat the bishop to e2. It might seem like we're losing a tempo, but that's not the case, and I'll explain why. We're not losing a tempo because the center is completely closed, because we have a space advantage, and because we've entered a forced variation that's already been studied, where we know the bishop can retreat to e2 and black won't be able to keep attacking or know where to go next. Now then, some very interesting moves are coming up. Pay attention. The knight comes to e7. With what idea? Well, with the idea of jumping to f5. Black has a clear plan to attack the d4 square and make it so we can't defend it. Therefore, we need to overprotect that super important square. Remember this well. If we lose that square, we lose the game. That's just how it is. Let's do some. b3, a very clear idea. If they want to attack that square with knight to f5, then we'll bring out our bishop to b2, and that's the end of the problems. In fact, that's what happened in the game. Knight to f5 and bishop to b2. That square is completely protected. Careful, protected. Not super protected or overprotected. What does it mean to be overprotected? For example, if 3 pieces are attacking us, then more than 3 should be defended. In this case, since 3 are defending, then here it wouldn't be considered overprotected. Let me explain a metaphor that will really help you understand these kinds of positions. Imagine, okay, that at home, someone has to stay to take care of the cat. All right? Okay, if only one person stays to take care of the cat and something unexpected comes up for that person, what will the cat do? We'll be lost. Then things will start going wrong. If, for example, there are 3 people at home watching the cat and something comes up for any of them, they could leave. Why? Because there would still be someone left to look after the cat. Well, the same thing would happen, for example, with this pawn, right? I'm explaining these kinds of metaphors to you because I think it's easier for them to stick in our heads when they come up in games. Be careful with this. Look at what the black pieces do here. Bishop to b4. I recommend that all of you who want to study seriously, pause the video for a moment and try to find what the best move is to get out of this check. I'm going to say it right now. The only move that works, and it's actually a very good move, is king to f1. This move might surprise many of you, but it's actually very interesting. Remember one thing, since this square isn't overprotected, there's no good way to defend it. If we block the check with the knight, whether on c3 or d2, we'd be blocking the defense from either the bishop or the queen, and we'd lose it. And the same thing would happen with the bishop. For example, they could simply trade pieces and then capture on d4. Therefore, the only way to stop this check is by moving the king to f1. And this is a very typical idea in the French defense, where white simply places the king on f1 and has a very good plan to follow. We're simply going to play g3 and then king to g2. And as you can see, the king has actually created an artificial castling and is going to be very safe here. And that bishop is probably going to end up a bit out of play once we drive it away with a 3. All right. Very good. The idea is that now, after this king to f1, black plays a very interesting move, which is h5, with a double purpose. What's the first purpose? The first purpose is obviously to attack the king, and the second is to create an outpost for the knight on f5. What does an outpost mean? Well, this knight is in a spot where it can't be attacked by pawns, because the e-pawn has already advanced too far, and the g-pawn won't be able to move to g4, since we've created a wedge with h5, precisely to prevent the advance of g4. You get it, right? Very good. After this move, h5 by the black pieces, comes g3, our ideal plan to develop the king via g2. Black continues with rook to c8, taking control of the semi-open file, which has now become an open file since there are no pawns left, and since they're not threatening anything for now, Nimzovich continues with his plan of king to g2. It's simple, right? It's true that the king couldn't castle, but he made an artificial castle with king to f1 and king to g2. Since the center is completely closed, we don't mind losing a bit of time. This is extremely important and you should really remember it, okay? You'll see that in this lesson, you're going to learn a lot. That's why I say it's really important for those of you who have the time that you can watch it more than once, okay? The idea is that if the center's closed, we can afford to lose several moves, whether it's with the bishop, with the king, as we've seen, because what's important is to position our pieces well, all right? You'll see that with some of them. We'll run into problems, but we're going to try to find solutions. After this move, king to g2, the game continues with g6, solidifying the position a bit and giving this bishop a clear path to maneuver on the dark squares. However, this does make things a bit tougher for the light-squared bishop, since all the pawns are on light squares. So this bishop is gonna have a slightly harder future, as it will run into its own pawn structure. After this g6, the white pieces play h3, a very useful move. Do you know what they're trying to do? They want to play g4, so that now they can drive the knight out of its advanced post. After playing g4, whether there's an exchange or not, the knight would have to retreat, we would have gained the advance post, and on top of that, the bishop would be blocked, and we'd be threatening to win it. For example, if here the knight were to retreat, a move like a3 would end up winning the bishop. Do you see it? Because it wouldn't have any possible squares to retreat to, so g4 is a real threat. And here Rubinstein realizes this and moves his bishop back to e7, not only pulling the bishop back, but now also preventing this g4. You know why g4 would be a mistake now? Because every pawn move creates weaknesses. Always, always, always. Keep that firmly in your mind. Every time someone moves a pawn, weaknesses are created. What weakness is created after playing g4? Well, the 4 square and the 4 square. In this case, they could continue with knight to h4, getting rid of one of the defenders of the d4 square. Because let's not forget, the real strength we need to focus on is super protecting the d4 pawn. So after the check, they would be trading off the knight, and if we exchange, this bishop would enjoy fantastic activity among the white squared pawns. And that's why here, playing g4 wouldn't be a good idea. Queen to d2. Very interesting. We need to develop the queen. And why not d3, which seems more active? Well, queen to d3 would be a serious mistake, especially in these types of openings where black's rook is placed on the c-file and works together with the knight. For example, here knight to b4 would force us to move the queen, and then a move like knight to c2, supported by the rook, would end up taking out our own rook on a 1, right? Therefore, here the move queen to d3 wouldn't be possible because of the combination of knight to b4 and knight to c2. And that's why a queen to d2 seems like a much better move. a5, trying to destabilize white's queen side. Although remember one thing, every pawn move creates a weakness. If this is the second time you're watching the video, you'll understand perfectly why I say this, and a 5 will end up being weak. Those who are watching the video for the first time will understand it in a little while, okay? And the idea is that now, after this f5, for the moment, it's true that we're not too worried about it. We have more important things to do. And here Nimzowitsch brings the rook to c1. Look how interesting this is. He still hasn't developed the knight on b1, which is really the colt or the piece that's going to be the hardest for us to develop because it doesn't have a possible development. If it comes out via 3, they're going to trade it off. They'll pull the bishop away from defending the d4 square, and we'd literally be losing the pawn, and with that, pretty much the game. If the knight tries to develop via c3, it would be blocking the bishop. Same thing if the queen moves and comes to d2, right? Because then we'd also stop defending this bishop. The knight on b1 is our, let's say, it's the Achilles heel of our position. But don't worry, we're going to look for a solution to that. So rook to c1, what a beautiful maneuver, huh? Even though we haven't castled, we bring our rook into the attack, facing off directly against the other rook, which is also placed on the open file. Rook to c1. Very good. How does the game continue? How do black respond after this rook to c1? With a very good move, bishop to f8. Whenever your opponent makes this kind of move, you should think, okay, why is he moving a bishop back to its original square? I can't be. Well, obviously, it's because there's a very strong threat, bishop to h6, threatening our queen and rook, winning the exchange. Of course, we could move the queen away, but we wouldn't have time to move the rook. Therefore, here Nimzowitsch, with very good judgment, plays queen to d1, moving it back to its original square. The queen is fine on its original square. Normally, we want to move it to connect the rooks, but since the rook is already crossed over and is now to the left of the queen can move back to d1, from where it controls the whole position, controls the d4 square, and keeps an eye on the advance of a4. Therefore, the queen is well placed on d1. What a great move! Bishop to h6, they're threatening our rook, and we need to consider where that rook is going to go. Let's think move by move. Let's see. Honestly, I don't like c2 because they're coming in with the knight, they're threatening us here, and they're going to take the initiative. I probably don't like claw 5 either. Let's put this back the way it lies. I probably don't like c5 either because honestly, they'd just attack it again. We'd have to retreat, they'd attack it again, we'd come back here, and this would just be a draw by repetition. We don't want to draw. We have a good space advantage. The move that comes to mind is Nimzovich's move, which is rook to c3. Even though it might seem like a really strange move, right? It's actually a very good move. The rook on c3 is very well placed. It can't be easily driven away, because this dark squared bishop can never chase it off, and it's obvious the light squared one won't be able to either. And a knight would just waste a lot of time trying. The only one that could do it would be this one, after a 7 and b5. And we can always either trade the bishop or play a 4 to defend this b5 square well, right? So here the rook on c3 is very well placed. Who knows, maybe in the future we can double up the rooks or even set up the daring Alekin's gun with 2 rooks and the queen. So the rook on c3 is very, very well placed. Rook to c3 by Nimzovich. Castling by black. And now that the bishop is in on e7, defending the h4 square, g4 is a really good move. Do you understand why? What was the problem with g4 before? That the knight could jump to h4? Not anymore, because it would be lost. So the knight has to retreat. It doesn't matter if they exchange pawns or not, the position would be exactly the same. So here, knight from f to e7 is pretty much a forced move. The game continues with normal development. Let's think about something. How many pieces are defending this square? 1 and 2. Surely, many of you here, before making this g4 move, were probably wondering if this d4 pawn was hanging and could be captured. The truth is, no, because after the exchanges, the bishop is still defending through x-ray. We would have the move rook takes c8, and after the exchanges, then we would win the knight on d4. I suppose that here, some amateur, someone with a bit less experience, might not have noticed that. But anyway, I'm clarifying it just in case any of you, when we played rook to c3, thought that we could lose the d4 square. When you watch this video a second time, if you do, pay close attention to that moment when we play rook to c3, because it's not possible to capture the d4 square. Very good. Right now, so I don't lose track, we need to develop the last piece we have left, and now we can because this square is well defended. Which way would you do it? Through d2 or through a3? This is a good moment, if you want, to pause the video and try to guess which way is better to develop this knight. The truth is, developing it through d2 would be a bad move, because here it would be completely blocked by the pawn. It couldn't move forward. If it tries to find routes over here, it would also be blocked by this g6 pawn. If it tries to go out through e6, it would also be blocked. So here, the correct solution, and it's a very typical maneuver when we need to overprotect the d4 square, is to play knight to a3, simply because we want to play knight to c2, defending and over-defending this d4 point. What for? So you can move the other pieces freely, because there will be enough to defend this d4 point. Knight to a3. Very good move. Alright, knight to b4. They're taking advantage now that white doesn't have a 3 available, so knight to b4 is a good move, placing the knight on an advanced square, but without a doubt here, white can play knight to c2. And look at what they're doing, trying to trade a knight that wasn't doing anything, the knight on b1, for the knight that was on c6, one of the main attackers of the d4 point. I call this a beneficial exchange. Our knight, which wasn't doing anything, in exchange for their best knight. You understand this, right? Here, the game continues as follows. Black decides to trade rooks. Here, there isn't any other move except bishop takes rook, obviously. Just like now, after knight takes knight, there's no other move except queen takes knight. Very good. At this point, after the exchanges, black plays rook to c8, trying to pin this bishop with the queen. And do you know where Nimzovich places the queen? And this is a spectacular lesson. He puts it, or rather he places the queen on b2. The idea behind placing the queen on b2, even though it might seem very, maybe cramped or very closed in, like she can't get out, right? The idea is key. To overprotect the d4 square, telling his friends, the knight and the bishop, if you have other plans, you can go, because I'll stay here to defend this square. Do you understand this? This is exactly what I was explaining to you at the beginning of the video. Therefore, the queen on b2 is extremely well placed, and you'll see that she's going to have some good ideas. Black plays bishop to b5, and here's the moment where we need to think. They're offering us a bishop exchange. Should we trade or not? When we're offered a piece exchange, what should we think about? Who does it benefit? In this case, I like to do an exercise and think, For example, imagine that now we try to remove all the bishops from the position. Erase all 4 bishops from your mind. Those of you following the game on your physical board, okay? Which I highly recommend, by the way. Remove the bishops. Just take them off. Now, let's see. Who would you rather have, white or black? The idea is that we prefer to have white. Why? Because here, as you can see, the black pieces have created several weaknesses, one on b7 and one on a5, by moving their pawns too much. After the moves g takes h and g takes h, we could create another weakness here on h5, which would be much more significant than the one on h3, because the king is much farther away. Therefore, here it actually benefits white to exchange bishops, and that's why Nimzovich trades these bishops. And not only that, but by taking advantage of the strong overprotection he has on the d4 square, he can also go after the other bishop, bishop to d2, exchanging pieces to reach a superior endgame. Obviously, if they capture, great, our plan's working out perfectly. However, of course, Rubinstein was a very strong player and understood that here he had to defend his bishop tooth and nail, right? He wanted to hold on to a position that wasn't so losing, no matter what. The idea is that even after this bishop to fate, white still enjoys a tremendously healthy position. His position, aside from the space advantage he gets from holding the d4 square, since keeping it also gives him control over e5, right? This position is clearly advantageous and easily attackable for white, and you'll see that for yourselves in just a moment. After this rook to c1, black quite wisely exchanges on g4 before white can do so on h5, because otherwise, as you've seen, that pawn would end up very poorly placed. And after these exchanges, h takes g4 and h takes g4, black plays rook to c6, obviously inviting white to capture so that the pawn structure can be fixed a little bit. Obviously, we're not going to fall for that mistake. Instead, here Nimzovich plays queen to a3. Once again, one of the super protectors goes out for a stroll. Why? Because since this point is super protected, we can move out with whichever piece we want. Very interesting move. The f5 square is being threatened by 2 pieces, so it has to be defended, either with the rook, which would be a very bad move because the rook would end up very passive, or, for example, by exchanging rooks, forcing one of the 2 attackers on the f5 square to retreat. Or, as Nimzovich comments about this game, there was a very interesting move, which is, excuse me, knight to f5, a discovered attack on the queen. And here he probably mentioned that the best move for black is to give up the queen, sorry, for white, to give up the queen in exchange for the rook and the knight. And how would this continue? Rook takes on c6, bishop takes the queen, and g takes f5. So we managed to win a rook and a knight in exchange for a queen. Well, it would have been a game slightly in white's favor. That's not what happened, but I'm mentioning it because it's very, very interesting. You can check it out for yourselves on the board. The idea is that here black chose the most logical move, the one any of us would use, which is rook takes rook to divert one of the 2 attackers from the a5 square. It would have been better, no doubt, to retreat the queen, because that way we occupy the open file. It's always good to occupy open files, right? And we're also doing something else, forming a battery with the bishop and queen to try to break through on h6 at some point, since the kingside pawns are on white squares, which means the dark squares have become much weaker. Alright, after these exchanges with the queen on c1, you could say there's still a lot of game left. But how would you feel if I told you that at this point, black could pretty much resign already? Surely, many of you are probably thinking, wait, why? This position looks pretty even. Same material, same pieces. I don't really see any clear advantage. Well, the idea here is that I understand that many of you might not be familiar with these kinds of endgame concepts because they're a bit more advanced, but let's suppose something for a moment. In any case, we can attack these pawns again, right? For example, with queen to a3, and we would win the a5 pawn. The only way to defend it would be with the move b6. You see, if they don't do that and lose one of these 2 pawns, this 2 versus 1, and on top of that with no rooks on the board, it would mean creating a passed pawn, where black, to stop it, would have to give up one of their minor pieces no matter what. And obviously, giving up one of their minor pieces is not a pleasant deal. At that point, I think we would all understand that they might as well resign, right? So here, at some point, they're forced to play bishop 6. And, well, the fact that they have to focus on the queen side gives us an opportunity to attack the king side really hard, right? we can see that it's not well defended, and a move like, for example, bishop to g5, threatening at some point to eliminate this knight completely, say bringing the queen in where white can't counterattack at all, would already be completely lethal. And many of you might say, come on, chess teacher, but the knight just moves away and that's it. I mean, to win this knight, you need two moves. First, bring in the queen, and then capture it, right? The knight just moves away and that's that. The idea is that it can't move to 8 because it would be lost. And the only other square it has is c6, which might seem like a really good move, putting pressure on the d4 square, right? But this move actually loses the knight because we just need to attack its defender, which is the queen, and when the queen moves away, we would capture the knight. So as you can see, yes, we are attacking the knight, but the knight needs to defend itself right away before it gets lost. For example, queen to e8. And this is finished quickly, for example, with bishop to f6, threatening at any moment to bring the queen in, either here or here, winning the game immediately. No matter how much they try to exchange bishops, we're not worried about being captured, because then we would capture with the pawn and checkmate would be inevitable. So, for example, we have time to bring in the knight. No matter how much they try to defend, I don't know, let's say with the bishop over here to stop the queen from coming in, we could continue with queen to h1 attacking the bishop, and when the bishop moves away, we would come in to deliver checkmate. And if, for example, they try to defend with their own queen, we can still play queen to h1, threatening checkmate on h7, which is completely unstoppable. That's why I say that this position, which at first glance might have seemed completely equal, is actually a clearly advantageous position for the white pieces. I'm aware that this lesson isn't easy. Those of you who have the time should watch it more than once. I strongly recommend it to everyone. I really hope that you enjoyed it. You already know that if you also want to train with boards and pieces just like the ones I use, I have got you a 15% discount at the store that I always use. I spoke with the supplier and, in fact, they gave all of us a 15% discount on everything in the store. You might not realize what that means because these kinds of professional chess stores already operate with a very small margin, so being able to get all the equipment at 15% off is really something to take advantage of. So I strongly recommend that if you want to upgrade your chess set, get a new one, or really train with a chess set that's truly worth it, you should go for it, right? When you actually feel like sitting down in front of it, it completely changes your perspective on chess, right? So I highly recommend it to all of you who are interested, okay? Of course, if you're not interested, then don't. All you have to do is go to the store I've linked in the description, chesses.art, and use the discount code CHSTH here with any purchase. You want some chess pieces? All right, then get some pieces. You want a board? All right, then get a board. Whichever one you like best. You want both pieces and a board? Well, they also have some really great complete sets, which are the ones I use on the channel. And with the discount, they're a really good deal. Just a heads up, these are professional chess sets, so naturally they're not cheap. But another great thing about this store, and why it's of course my favorite, is that they let you pay in installments and with no interest. So if you want, you can check it out. I'll leave the link down below in the description, or you can look it up yourself, chesses.art, and use the discount code CHSTeacher. Plus, whatever you order will arrive at your home within 24 or 48 hours. Don't tell me that's not amazing. I hope you love this lesson as much as I enjoyed explaining it. Honestly, I was really excited to talk about these slightly deeper topics. If you like them, let me know in the comments. Leave a big like and I'll bring more lessons like this. And I'll see you tomorrow, as always, for those of you who are subscribers to the channel, in the next video. Goodbye.